Paul Joseph Watson of Prison Planet. Paul, welcome back to the program. I read your article yesterday. I was very impressed with it about the fracking of the shale in Poland and Romania. Where does that? How's that going to play out, Paul?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. So how's that going to play out?
Yeah, the premise is that this is largely an energy war because Europe and NATO are desperate to end their dependence on natural gas from Russia, while Russia is desperate to maintain its near monopoly on natural gas in Eastern Europe. So that's the undercurrent that's dominating this conflict. And it all
Paul Joseph Watson, you wrote a very brilliant, incisive article that I read, and I paraphrased it yesterday, but I want the listeners to understand what's going on here. Putin has a near monopoly on natural gas to Europe. He's the Pacific Gas and Electric of Europe, in other words, for those of us on the West Coast. So if he turns the gas off, they freeze to death. Now, naturally, the Europeans are trying to develop their own independent sources of energy, and so they're fracking in Poland and Romania and in Eastern Europe. Don't you believe that Putin might invade the entire Ukraine to prevent the breakup of his monopoly?
I think it's certainly possible, but I think the current occupation of Crimea is about setting the precedent for eastern Ukraine being under Russian control, because 3 of the 4 major natural gas pipelines run through eastern Ukraine from Russia. So that's why, for example, shortly before the overthrow of the prior government, you had energy giants such as Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, and Exxon, who had started exploration for new natural gas fields in western Ukraine. And they actually discovered huge new natural gas fields, but they couldn't get the go-ahead from the former Ukrainian government because Putin was leaning on them with this trade deal prior to the overthrow. So now, in the aftermath of the coup, which the documents all prove was USAID, National Endowment for Democracy funded, those deals are likely to be agreed. So this is why Putin has escalated the military occupation of Crimea, because he's attempting to create a bulwark against that exploitation of Western Ukraine by the likes of Chevron and Exxon.
Okay, today we learned an hour ago Russia test-fired an ICBM amid tension over the Ukraine. Obviously, that was a warning, wasn't it?
It's a warning, yeah, but I think a lot of it from both sides is hot air, because if you actually look at the basics of the military strength of both sides, Ukraine and Russia don't have enough strength to outmaneuver one another. So I think this is heading towards a de facto partition of East and West Ukraine, and then it's going to swivel back into a political battle about who controls the puppet government in Kiev.
Now, you said something that I happened to, from my reading, I believe you are correct. You said it was the United States that organized the coup that overthrew the duly elected leader. I think everyone seems to forget that the man who was overthrown, Yanukovych, was elected. Wasn't he elected?
He was democratically elected just a month after these protests began, which, again, the documents now confirmed USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, George Soros' Open Society Institute. Those exact groups on the ground were being funded by the U.S. State Department. So that was all in swing back in November. Democratically elected government was overthrown as a result of these militants. And now, as you mentioned in your introduction, this neo-Nazi Svoboda party has been given 3 key positions within that post-coup government, even though they've got proven links to neo-Nazis. I mean, one of their top officials created a think tank in homage to Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, and Victoria Nuland, the U.S.'s top diplomat in Europe, met with the leader of this Svoboda party just a couple of months before the overthrow.
So McCain is lying, or he's an idiot, when he says that Putin is lying about any neo-Nazi connection. Let's listen to clip 6 for a moment. Listen to this dumb moron. I have to characterize him. He's the most dangerous man on the chessboard right now. It looks like he could get us into a war. Listen to clip 6.
Vladimir Putin's statements to the press there in the last few hours that these are neo-Nazis and anti-Semites, and still denies that it's Russian troops.
Let's stop right there. Now, that was on Fox News, and the empty skirt just went and refixed her lipstick. But we know, as a fact of reality, there are Ukrainian nationalists who are neo-Nazis. or sympathizers. Let's clear that up, Mr. Watson. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, Time magazine put out a report about a week ago saying the same thing as McCain, that there were no neo-Nazis in Kiev. Yet BBC News and others have broadcast footage of literal columns of armed militants wearing SS armbands in homage, of course, to the Waffen-SS, marching through Kiev armed. And now, as I said, they've been given 3 top positions within the government. So not only are there neo-Nazis patrolling the streets of Kiev, they're actually being given positions of power under the umbrella of this fascist Svoboda party.
How in the world could this be buried by the world? Well, I shouldn't ask what I know to be true. The world press is a propaganda machine, and during the 1999 bombing of Kosovo, although every bridge on the Danube was blown up by Bill Clinton's repainted NATO under General Wesley Clark, not one picture ever appeared of one bridge being blown up on the Danube River. Not one picture by the world press. I mean, the same thing is going on here, Paul.
Well, they routinely underplay it, don't they? I mean, we saw what happened in Syria, where years ago the Council on Foreign Relations, which again is a front for the State Department, was openly calling for the U.S. to side with al-Qaeda. Then we saw John McCain actually visit Syria and meet with al-Qaeda-linked militants. So time and time again, these fascists, these extremist forces are being backed by elements of the U.S. government.
But why is it John McCain, who was always on the front lines with these crazy elements, what is he doing? Who is he working for?
He's working for the Council on Foreign Relations, basically. That's who I see as the head of the Hydra behind this, because they've been calling for this for years. So,
who Leslie Gelb and his friends?
Sorry?
Leslie Gelb and his friends at the CFR?
Leslie Gelb, of course, Hillary Clinton joked that she would only have to walk down the street to get her orders from the CFR because it's so close to the State Department building in Washington, D.C. So these are the crooks that are behind this. They were behind it in Syria, and they're behind it again in Ukraine.
Where does this go? Paul Joseph Watson of Prison Planet. You write articles that I read all the time because they're very insightful. They're very well researched. You know more about this than I do. Can you take a guess where this is going?
It's going to end up with the partition of Ukraine. Whether that turns into a Berlin Wall situation, it's anybody's guess. But, of course, the danger in that, even though a lot of the rhetoric we're hearing from Kerry and Obama is hot air, as per usual, there's no teeth behind it, the danger is that we're going to see a confrontation that could explode this out of control. We saw the footage today of the Ukrainian soldiers marching up to the Russian-held base where the Russian troops fired warning shots in the air. They had actual missile launchers trained on these Ukrainian troops. So aside from the larger geopolitical play, we could have an incident which could spark a hot war within the Ukraine, and that's the big risk.
So in other words, a war could begin almost by accident in this situation.
It's so easy for that to happen. It's unbelievable.
You know, this reminds me of the guns of August 1917. I've said this repeatedly. World War I was a war that started almost by accident in a very similar manner, again, over an incident in the Balkans, or related to the Balkans. It was a tinderbox, and one world power threatened the other. One dared the other, and then they were sort of dragged into it based on an ego game. I see a very similar element here. Is that an irrational analysis, or do you think there are comparabilities here?
I think it's entirely comparable, and the fact that World War I, 100 years ago, started on much less of a pretext than some of the footage we've seen even today out of Ukraine is chilling, to say the least. And this goes into deep state politics. This is way above the teleprompter reader Obama. And as you said, any kind of confrontation, which we saw today, could spark this into something that gets quickly out of control. So while Putin's trying to call Obama's bluff in the short term, and this rhetoric about sanctions is largely hot air from what I can see, it could quickly be taken out of their hands and turn into a hot war situation.
Okay, well, that's an important point of view, meaning anything could happen, and God knows with Putin. Okay, so we hear Obama and Kerry threatening sanctions, then offering $1 billion of our money, again, U.S. money, to Ukraine. Where are they getting the money from? That's what I want to know. Where did $1 billion suddenly come from? Where do they get these sums from? How do they get this money?
Well, Victoria Nuland actually admitted that the U.S. had invested $5 billion in, quote, a new form of government for the Ukraine during a press conference back in November. And, of course, then she was caught on the leaked audio tape, the phone conversation with Jeffrey Pyatt, another top U.S. diplomat, actually picking the very personalities who would later take positions of power within the post-coup government. The Prime Minister...
What are they doing this for? Is it all for the oil companies? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's part of the geopolitical encirclement of Russia. It's getting the military bases getting onto the frontier of Russia under NATO. I mean, that's been their agenda for years. They've got...
Wait, why is Russia suddenly the glint in their eye? What do they have against Russia? Russia doesn't seem to have any imperialistic tendencies, or am I mistaken here? It seems to me we're in their sphere of influence. They're not meddling in Mexican politics here. We're meddling in the equivalent of their Mexican politics.
Well, it is the equivalent of as if, Moscow had gone into Mexico or Canada and installed an anti-U.S. government, an extremist government. So it's amazing to think of it in that context. But in terms of NATO, I mean, they've been planning this for years. That's why they've got the missile bases in Romania and Poland. So although Russia's army is currently vastly inferior to the U.S., they are engaged in a military build-up. As you said earlier with the ICBM launch, they're investing a lot of money into new and advanced weapons, while concurrently Obama seems to be dwindling the power of the U.S. military forces. But NATO basically wants a new Cold War, as far as I can see it. They want to build up the military-industrial complex. The threat of terrorism has largely abated in terms of how much they can use it for fear-mongering to build up the military-industrial complex. So they need a new threat, and they're going back to Russia and Reds under the bed.
I'm speaking with Paul Joseph Watson. You're listening to The Savage Nation. Here's another curveball that I can't figure out. Why is it that so many knee-jerk conservatives, especially in the media, I mean, we'd expect it from Wolfowitz and Pearl and the other neocons who got us into Iraq and Afghanistan. Why is it that all of these people in the media who claim to be anti-Obama, anti-New World Order, are suddenly attacking Russia and at the same time attacking Obama? Do they not understand what's going on? Why do they continuously refer on their radio shows to Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan? There's no comparison to the times of Ronald Reagan. It's a different world today.
I think they're nervous about appearing to side, for example, with protesters and pro-Russian forces in Crimea who hold aloft, Lenin signs and Stalin signs, which, I mean, I am too. I bashed Putin for years and years over his activities. I mean, he's a thug, he's a tyrant. But when it comes to the fact that he's the only bulwark against this globalist expansion, this neo-imperialism, which is actually against everything that the Founding Fathers stood for, it creates confusion amongst conservatives because on the one hand, they want to side with the Founding Fathers in terms of no interference abroad, but they see people like Vladimir Putin and they see his supporters still holding up Lenin and Stalin signs, so understandably there's a nervousness about appearing to side with him. But again...
Well, how can they have it both ways? They attack Obama relentlessly, as I do, and then they suddenly attack Putin. So which side are they on?
They're on their own side. It's basically the neocon Straussian faction, as you talked to Paul Craig Roberts about in one of your previous interviews. And they're calling for war. I mean, you've got ex-military generals on Fox News calling for war with Putin. And it's
Hold on, we're speaking with a very important man, Paul Joseph Watson of Prison Planet. As usual, he knows things that most people in the media don't know. And we've gone to the lengths of the earth to get you information you're not getting anywhere else on the program. And I hope you'll stay with us to continue this discussion. I'll be right back. SFO.
I agree with what Angela Merkel said after she spoke to him, is that he's living in some other world. I think that either he does not have the facts, he is being fed propaganda or his own propaganda. It doesn't make any sense. There are no calls for assistance. This is not something
Turn off this whiny, nasally, devious, evil harridan, this lobbyist for China, this hag, this evil witch, Madeleine Albright, who destroyed Serbia in the name of the New World Order. We haven't seen this hag for years, And right just as the hedgehog comes out at a certain time, here she came again, popped up, took out time from a busy lobbying on behalf of China, and started to attack Putin. I want to go back to my guest on the Savage Nation, Paul Joseph Watson. Paul, are you there? I can't seem to get him on line 10. Paul, are you back with us?
I'm here, yeah.
Paul, what do you think of Madeleine Albright? Who is this lunatic?
Well, she's the lunatic who said that 500,000 dead Iraqi children was a price worth paying. She also said, as you just played in the clip there, that Crimea never called for assistance. Well, the Crimea's prime minister said, quote, "I appeal to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin."
Unbelievable. Well, this woman is another one of the NWO. Paul Joseph Watson, Prison Planet on the Savage Nation.